And welcome everyone to a Trekyards mission briefing fan design this time, but special fan design, fan film designs. We have a special guest as well, so it's a very, very special episode. So our special guest, Stuart Foley. Hello, Foley. Stuart Foley.
Hi, how you doing? I design nothing. No. Our special guest today is Eric Henry, the creator of Pacific 201. Nice to have you with us, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm guessing we're going to take a look at the USS Pacific.
The Pacific. It's no USS.
Yep, so this is an upcoming fan film, Pacific 201, bit of a different take on the Trek universe, and this is a part 2 of the video we've just done the mission briefing for, and we thought we'd just bring Eric on to get the details, but not necessarily all the details, because some surprises are fun, but maybe a few little nuggets of info here and there. But, onto the first picture. It's basically the same set as last time, but a few new ones, and this first picture is the Connie and the Pacific, and it's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so Eric, first of all, one thing you notice about the Pacific is how bright white-ish it is. It is a different colour palette to the Connie, although it seems very similar here, and the NX, and that's one thing we talked about a lot in our previous episode. So why the colour palette?
Well, the color palette is... I really wanted to go with a modern-day space program look with the colors. So the hull is very white because, you know, the space shuttle is white, the International Space Station is white, and then there's like dark gray accents, and that's pretty much it. Like, it's white and it's dark gray, and then you have the glowing elements, the blues and the lights and stuff like that.
We kind of said that this felt like the 2001 of Star Trek.
Yeah, there's definitely some 2001 visual inspiration.
And is this film very much the in-between step of Enterprise or TOS, or are you trying to sort of off in a slightly different direction? Like, this is a possible universe, not necessarily the one we know and love.
Well, the way I look at Star Trek is it's a representation of a universe. So, like, the literal, what's literally on screen in TOS, for instance, isn't necessarily what the literal 23rd century would look like, even in the Star Trek universe. And even with, you know, the NX class, like, that may or may not literally be what the NX class looks like. You know, these are historical productions that it's like, you know, we make a movie about Rome, for instance, and we might get things wrong or we might take artistic liberties. So I assume that, you know, the creators of TOS took artistic liberties with the look of the world. So it's not that Pacific 201 is like a possible universe. It's a possible artistic interpretation of the universe. So I still consider it very prime universe. It's just the necessary, like the specific nuts and bolts may or may not always be. I don't put a lot of stock in visual canon, for instance, but the events and the timeline are definitely very rigid to me.
That's a very cool take on things. I like that a lot. One of the things we did mention in our mission briefing was the fact that you use a lot of the blue. It's very reminiscent of the JJ verse. Was that an inspiration, or why are there no red Bizarre collectors, let's say?
Well, if you look at this picture really closely, there are red Bizarre collectors. There's a little ring on that.
Oh yeah.
On that, it's red actually. The elimination of red was mostly aesthetics, and it's more of a TMP look. You know, the nacelles on the refit Enterprise. There's no red Bizarre collectors. It's just the blue vents on the nacelles, or the purplish vents, depending on what you're looking at. So it was mostly to make the design look more mature, rather than like it's the red and the blue always seemed a little kind of cartoony to me. It didn't look like something real. So one of the first things I did was eliminate the red, but you can still see it. It's still there, and under certain conditions, it'll be brighter or darker and stuff like that.
My theory in the mission briefing was that this is after the Romulan Wars. After the NX, we see the red Bizarres, we see the blue grills. In TOS time, apart from the internal grill, which can either be lit or not, that it's a much more armoured look. My theory was that between the two times that TOS, the warp technology has improved so much, you need to have this armour around themselves which generate the same warp field, and coming out of the Romulan Wars, it would make sense to not have these weak spots in the ship. So Pacific 2, well, the Pacific, maybe it doesn't need to have that open facade, the open grills of the warp engines, because that armor is actually very essential, which then pushes.
Right, absolutely. I've thought the same thing. Like, maybe exposed Bussard collectors is much more efficient, but blown up Bussard collectors are worse. So
and theoretically, why couldn't it be a hatch or some sort of thing that opens, because you don't need to collect star matter the entire time. When you're in a battle, you don't need to do that. So why not have them locked off, and then when you're
that's a good idea
in a nebula, just open up.
I might go back and add like some kind of opening. That's a good idea.
Because it'd be kind of nice to have one shot just of it, going through a clearly nebula location. This is where we're refueling, and it becomes a very TOS style. That might look quite snazzy.
That's a cool idea. I like that.
And then it's even more thought out.
Indeed.
Anyway, the next picture, which we were looking at the two in beautiful detail, but now this is the scale of the Pacific and the Connie, which is interesting.
Now we know the crew on the Pacific's 100 and how many people? I can't recall offhand.
Well, okay, I'm gonna say something. It was a little over 100 originally, back when the ship was much smaller. Earlier in the production, the ship was small, and the crew was small. And then I scaled the ship up a little bit because things weren't fitting in there the way I wanted them to fit in there. Because I originally had imagined a very small bridge, and I scaled the ship around that, and I made the bridge bigger, and the ship got bigger, and then the crew stayed the same. So the crew size, there's no canonical crew size at the moment. It's probably closer to 200.
Well, I've got to say that we've looked at this ship, obviously, in the previous episode, and this scale does look, you said this is an updated scale chart, this does look a lot bigger than it felt in the previous pieces. This is almost on par. Another thing we said in Axonar specials, all the Axonar ships are smaller because the nacelles have been brought in, whereas the TOS Connie, they're kind of more out there, same with the NX. So if you push the nacelles further back, it'll almost be the same length. So it's definitely bigger than I thought.
Yeah, I mean, the chief thing about the Pacific is that it's mostly a saucer section, and it doesn't have a secondary hull. Like, it does have a secondary hull, but that's just a hangar bay and a deflector. There's no warp core down there. It's what we call the mission pod, where it can be swapped out. Like the Pacific has a deflector and a shuttle bay, but maybe a different variety of this class might have extra warp core
or torpedo
stuff, a bigger torpedo. Yeah, there are torpedoes down there too, or like a sensor package. A bigger shuttle bay.
It's the reversed Nebula class almost.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, actually.
That's
cool.
Could he even act as like a cargo character, like the Ptolemy, where you could attach cargo containers on the bottom there?
That's true. It's totally swappable. Actually, almost everything on the Pacific is modular. That's a big part of the design, is that every piece comes apart. And if you look really close at certain things, they're actually like latches that hold things together. And at the press of a button, the whole ship could just disassociate.
Cool. One thing that this picture shows a good sense is that we said in the last version that the Pacific is very much saucer engines, and this big line of the back part is very abrupt. That we're sort of saying that it might have looked slightly more curvy, sexy if it actually included sort of a Connie style back portion of that non-secondary hull, secondary hull, because it does feel very, very abrupt. What was the thought behind? Yeah.
The hard lines of the Pacific, okay, like a big part of the Pacific was to purposely not make it pretty, or to avoid the temptation to make it pretty. Like, I imagine the secondary hull should be a perfect cylinder.
Well, like Daedalus style.
Right, yeah. The Constitution class needs to look futuristic, and it's got those curves. And like, curves are futuristic, so how do you downscale from that? You just make it a perfect cylinder, and to make it edged or curved or angled in any way would kind of defeat that. Like, it might look better that way, but that's not the point. It's supposed to be efficient and easy to build.
Great reasoning, but we had to maybe do a refit for the next Pacific 202, and it's just got this nice secondary hull evolution. There's
room for that.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Nice. All right, well, let's move on to the next picture. And this is a great shot of your shuttlecraft.
Brand new shuttle.
Yeah, the thing I like about this is it doesn't look like any other Starfleet shuttles we've seen so far.
It looks like the Stingray from Stingray. If anyone knows a reference. It's a British.
I don't know the reference.
So how did you go about designing the shuttlecraft?
The shuttlecraft, okay, well, there's a few things. Firstly, the shuttlecraft is designed with the idea that it has to be like a self-sustaining ship, because we have minivan shuttles, which are like the shuttle pods in Enterprise, and even the like the Galileo and TOS. The Galileo, like we think of the shuttle pods in Enterprise as like smaller and compact, but they're actually kind of the same in scale, like similar size, and they're similar complements. You can hold 7 people in both, and they both do the same things. They're both about the size of a big van. But I wanted to, the story kind of required a more self-sustaining shuttlecraft,
Well,
which
a
is
runabout style.
like a runabout, right? This isn't quite runabout scale, but it's pretty big. You can fit a lot of people in this. It's more like a charter bus than a van. So it actually has like compartments inside. There's a cockpit compartment. There's a crew slash, there's a cabin for the passengers or cargo, and then there's an engineering compartment in the back. And it's supposed to be something that you could send down to a planet, and you could have like overnight or week-long planet-side missions inside this thing. It has its own transporter. The only thing is, this particular model of the shuttle does not have warp. The idea being that warp drive in a small ship is still a little unattainable, though it could happen if maybe you sacrifice the crew compartment and filled it with a warp core, that sort of thing. And there is a warp version in the film, but
cool, nice to
we're on
see.
that
Spoilers.
later. Yeah.
But it's an interesting take on the shuttle pod. It's clearly the shuttle pod-esque. It's
Yeah,
an
there
evolution
is
from
shuttle
that.
pod inspiration, and there's boat inspiration in there
Yes,
as well.
very much so. It's cool. It's different. So the next photo is basically the fleet of Pacific 201, or Pacific, the movie. We talked about how you've now modified the NX, you modified the Daedalus. Really interesting fleet, a very interesting look, and yeah. Any thoughts, Eric? Because we've discussed this bit, but what do you think when you see this photo?
Well, what we see in this photo is the starships of the era. In the original intention of TOS was that a starship was a specific variety of vessel that was special in some way. You have normal ships, but then you have a starship. So here we have starships, and they're rare ships. We've had tons of other ships. There were lots of ships made during the Romulan War, and then even during the NX period, we had like the Intrepid type, and we had the whatever they call it, the pointier one.
Yeah.
But like only the NX class is like the starship. That's the idea anyway, or my interpretation of the idea. So by the time of the launching of the Pacific, there have been no other starships made. We have like patrol boats and supply ships, but no starships. So
in that sense, this is the iterative step between the NX and the Connie in the starship class, almost.
in a sense, yeah. I mean, technically the Daedalus happened before the Pacific did,
But clearly not of the same scope, and you can see how much smaller it is than the
there's
NX-01.
experimentation. So like we have the NX-01, and then we have the 100 series starship, which is the Daedalus class, and the 200 series starship, which is the Integrity class, which is the Pacific.
Clever.
And then you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 17, where we have Kirk's Enterprise.
So you're designing 17 different classes? Wow, Eric.
Well,
Big task there.
there's already a few made up in between there. We've got the 500 series, which is like the Saladin class and stuff like that.
Cool. But let's move right along to very fascinating scale shot. Clearly the scale is there, but Stuart, do you want to talk about some of the things we thought when we saw this picture last time?
Yeah, one of the things we kind of thought would look well, we like the coloring of it. We love the bronze ring around the outer edge of the sensor dish there. But we thought the inner part should be a gold or copper color as well, instead of just the plain white. So why did you go with this kind of look?
Well, again, this was one of those artistic things where I wanted to make the design look a little more mature. Like it's the same as putting the paneling over the Bussard collectors. It just, the more muted it is, the more realistic it looks to me. And a huge copper dish, especially when I was looking at it as a scale thing, because I was detailing it, and I thought, like, you would. This is like the size of a. I don't know. It's big, like a big, huge atrium or something. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
and to imagine that whole thing as this one like consistent coppery color just seemed cartoony to me. Like when you build it as a model, it makes sense. And when you see it on the show, it makes sense. But when you see it up close with a guy next to it, it looks weird. It looked weird to me. So I thought it would be interesting if it, there was like this two-tone, it was white, it was normal paneling, and then there was like this exposed element. And maybe that copper is underneath everything. Maybe parts of it open up. I mean, that is something that I liked about the JJ Deflector, which it had like opening things on it when it went to warp. It's kind of hard to see, but it happens. But I mean, I hate to say that there were things that I liked about JJ, but I just thought it made the Deflector look a little more mature to do that.
I think it's fair enough to take a look at the most modern iteration of the classic look and then take design choices from that. A few things later on that we've seen that like that's a bit of a JJ or a bit of a Kelvin, so I think we'll get to those. But I'm quite pleased that you still kept with the blue glow back, because you can argue that TOS, the NX to TOS doesn't fit, because why has it gone from backlit to just a dish?
Right.
So I'm glad you still kept that, because canonically that would be there, and it's a nice little in between. So good job there.
Yeah. Another thing we mentioned too was the observation deck, or whatever that is in the neck.
That's what that is.
There we go.
Yep, it's there. There's a similar one on top. They kind of mirror each other.
Yeah. And going to the next picture, we've got what is that exactly?
This is a new picture, and it's interesting.
Yes, this goes along with what I said about everything about the Pacific is modular. And this was inspired by a Doug Drexler thing, where he said that the NX engineering section slides out like a drawer.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really sure how that would work. I would love to see how he would visualize that. So that's a challenge to Doug Drexler. I want to see that visualized. But this is kind of how I interpreted it for the Pacific, where this very kind of self-contained drawer that would just slide in and plug up, and we need a new engineering section.
So it's almost like a battery or a cartridge.
Yeah, it's kind of like a battery, I guess. Though the other thing is, what I don't depict here is there's actually a second drawer that comes out of the little drawer, which is the warp core. So the core slides into the engineering, which slides into the back of the ship. So if you just wanted to take the core out, you could just take the core out. But if the whole engineering was blown up or something, you could totally pull it out or do service on the.
So you've got warp core ejection and warp core rub ejection, or engineering rub ejection.
That's cool. I like that.
So where are the deuterium tanks? And I assume that's being filtered in through the side 2 or side 4.
You can't see it here, but the back rim of the saucer has little tiny boxy bays, and those are actually deuterium cells that are also removable, and they fill up with deuterium. They stay charged or whatever, and you can swap them out for new fresh ones and stuff like that. But there's like a little bay of deuterium cells along the back side of the saucer that you can see in some pictures. It's a very subtle detail, but they're there.
Very cool. And the next pitch is a great 2-shot, but there's one thing we really highlighted in this version. 4 phaser turrets, 4 torpedo tubes, 20 missile tubes. Now I'll postulate what we said, and then we can hear that it's completely wrong, and this is what you thought. But coming out of a big war, maybe that they thought, well, we've got these inferior weapons, but they can still do a punch with either nukes or lower yield warheads. Well, if we put them all around the hull in launch pods, then weapons are only there to defend you in a situation. So to get out of that situation, maybe you've got this one button that fires all 20 torpedoes or missiles, sorry, and that gives that edge. What, sorry?
Death Blossom from Last Starfighter. One button launches them all.
Absolutely, and then it has time to escape, and then obviously you can reload a space dock or whatnot. So that was what we took from that. But missiles.
Yeah, a lot of this is semantics. I mean, this is an old picture, way back, back when the ship was new to me, and I was still figuring things out. The missile tubes, it's a little. What they are payload vehicle bays, where you can put in probes, or you can put in escape vehicles, or you can put in
So it's the
any number of
so it's the
things.
Doug Drexler NX cylinder style.
It's kind of like that, but like the Pacific, the ship, the Pacific, is loaded with some missiles, but it's also loaded with some probes and other things. Those bays are very versatile, and they use standard payload vehicles where you can put on a warhead and make it a missile, or you can fire a probe, or maybe an evacuation pod or something, because those are not small. You could fit a few people clustered in there. So missile tube. The idea was, coming out of the war, you have, like what you said, this antiquated technology. That my idea was that antimatter was really scarce during the war, where we can't just go firing torpedoes everywhere. We have to come up with some other kind of weapon that is destructive but doesn't use antimatter, precious antimatter. So there's some kind of missile that's developed for the war, or brought out of service, from the past.
I mean, fundamentally, a nuclear warhead we've seen in Galactica, it could still do a hell of a lot of damage.
Right.
Even if you blow it up near the ship, the radiation the blast wave will affect shields. Or even if you put some sort of radioactive material inside the inside the missile, so that when they hit a part of the hull, they can degrade it, acid. I mean, there's payloads you can do that you don't just need an explosive warhead for.
Right. So the idea was, it's a hangover from the war, and there's a lot of that in Pacific 201. This war culture that they're kind of still trying to get out of.
We speculated that they were along the rim of the saucer. Did they face in all directions, or how does that work exactly?
If you look at this specific picture, even though it's a really old version of the model, there's the bridge in the center, and there's like this ring around the bridge, and then you'll see there are 5 little tiny hatches on either side of the front edge there. Those are the top 10, and then there are identical ones on the bottom 10.
Nice.
You said this was an old chart, but it says they're warp 6.6. So why pick such a speed? Because obviously warp 7 is the TOS, warp 5 is the NX. There's quite a bit of in between, but you still have to make the warp, the Constitution class, the latest ship of the line, fast. So why 6.6?
Well, the thing I notice about warp speeds is that we get to warp 1 with Cochrane, but it takes them how many years to get to warp 5? Like
80?
100 years or 90 years or 80 years. It takes a long time to get to warp 5.
80, yeah.
We have,
although there was the holdover from the Vulcans impeding our technology, and we know that they have warp 3.3 when Archer's younger, and then 5. So they do get quicker quite fast. Obviously, Cochrane had to sell the Phoenix or do whatever he had to do, so it's probably like a jumping stage. But yeah, there was certainly a time period.
You get to 5, and how long does it take to get to 7? Another 100 years. So it seems like warp 5 is, for as long as it took to get there, warp 5 is some kind of like magical number that's really hard to break. And it took 100 years to get to warp 7. So this is 40 years after Archer, and it's 60 years before Kirk. So 6.6, like, it was kind of like, it needed to be lower than Kirk's, but it needed to be higher than Archer. It didn't need to be, but I thought there should be some development. We've got a warp 6 engine now that we're pushing the limits of.
Now, is it fair to say though that this 6.6 is when you see Archer push to 5.3? This is the ship shaking. This is emergency speed, right?
The ship cannot hold 6.6 for very long. Its cruising speeds would be much lower than that, and they'd probably be like, its cruising speeds would be like the middle of pushing it for Archer, so like 5 something, or like its max normal speed would be like 5 something, and then.
So it's basically a warp 6 engine that you can push. They've refined.
Yeah.
So it's like second gen warp 6, and you can push it. Cool. So that is it for this week's Trekyards, guys. Hope you loved it.
Tune in again for the continuation. Keep your eyes peeled, because it's coming.
Ooh, looking forward to it.
You too.
Me 3.
Bye, everybody.